Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. I'll pull up the caboose, but glad to be here. Brian, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I'm Brian Poppy, Chief Data Officer at Mutual of Omaha. I am an actuary by background, so probably a heavy analyst maybe, rather than the pure technology background that sometimes Chief Data Officers come from. I've been doing a variety of things and have been at ITC. I think I've only missed 1 year, and I'm super excited to see how it's grown. So happy to talk about end-to-end data today, so I'm looking forward to our conversation. Thanks for having me.
Hi, everyone. Nick Volpe. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for American Equity Life. I just joined the company about 8 weeks ago. Spent a lot of time working with the two gentlemen to my left at Guardian, my former life. So happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Zambrito. I'm the Solution Lead for Human API's life insurance vertical. Been with the company for about 6 years, helping carriers take advantage of our health data platform. So very excited about the discussion.
And my name is Joe Kasav. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Atidot. And Atidot is focused on driving more value from existing customers, figuring out opportunities to engage and increase the lifetime value over time. Very happy to be here.
And I'm Woody Clemmer with Formotive. I'm the head of growth. We are a behavioral data company. We predict user intent by analyzing digital body language as customers and agents engage with online forms. And just to level set with everybody here, we have a couple folks on the carrier side, a couple folks on the technology side. Our conversation today is around data, end-to-end data, digitizing the digital experience, or really moving from the face-to-face way of doing business that we have been, so used to for so many years, moving that to end-to-end digital experiences and leveraging the data available to us today to do so. So as we move from, manual underwriting and manual processes to instant decisioning, face-to-face customer interactions to faceless customer interactions, there is now so much data available to us. What we want to do today is talk a little bit about how do we go from trying to boil the ocean and have so much data available to really productizing and acting on that data. I think it was in the description that I learned from Atidot that something like 80% of the data that's available to carriers today is not being used. So I wanted to start really this conversation by saying how do we go from boiling the ocean and saying, okay, everything from marketing to underwriting, policy admin, claims, can each of you just give number one priority, or at least what you think is the number one most important thing right now from a prioritization of this data perspective? Brian, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So the 80% number is I don't know if that's accurate, but it feels right. So we have a lot of data that is locked away in something like a PDF or something like some sort of scanned document that just is not shared with the types of analysts that could use that data for a variety of things. Call recordings is another one, I suppose, that we haven't figured out how to fully unlock. So for us at Mutual of Omaha, one of the things we're working on doing is unlocking and then making that data available. And that doesn't necessarily, to your point, mean we've got to go and take every scanned document since forever and turn that into some sort of data, but at least have that capability available so then when somebody comes and asks the questions, it's like, oh, I remember how to do that. I go do this thing, and then here's the data, and I can mash that up against whatever else I want to, whether it's claims data or underwriting data or what have you. But that's priority number one for us, is starting to build those pipelines such that the analysts can derive insights that they've never been able to have before because that 80% of that data is stored somewhere where they just can't get at it.
Yeah, so interestingly, the last 8 weeks, my priority has changed. When I was at Guardian, it was very much about underwriting and using tools like Human API and getting through instant decisioning underwriting. But I'm fortunate enough now in the annuity space, you don't have to do any underwriting until they do reverse underwriting for longevity. So the priority now is actually similar to what Brian said, structuring the data that we currently have before we add more data to it. As insurance companies and carriers, we have a ton of information about our clients. We have long-term relationships with them, and yet we don't leverage all the data that we currently have. We always look to buy more and add more and add more. So we're definitely looking at how do we structure our data, make it available, before we begin to add new data into the mix to start to think about predictive analytics and next best product and next best sale option. So, it's really about structuring what we've got first.
Yeah, I would say the carriers that we talk to are just everyone, what's a priority for you? It's consumer experience, right? We're digitizing, we're trying to make a better consumer experience, and you look at all the progress a carrier makes, it usually comes to a screeching halt with underwriting, right? As soon as I have a fully underwritten product, we need things like blood, urine, medical records, and that's where the consumer kind of is introduced to a new process they're not really used to, like with Amazon, right? That's where we're helping carriers with. We're seeing that access to digital health data is a way that they can potentially automate and make that friction for the consumer be much, much better than what it is today. So I would say that's where we're seeing most of the traction with the carriers. They're saying, hey, this is the important piece for us now is streamlining this underwriting process. And then I would say next is probably doing the same for claims experience.
I'll focus on the areas that are obviously a higher priority for us, but I agree that underwriting is one of those key areas. I think the question is how do you contextualize the data you have more than how do you better utilize it. The piece that we're most interested in is that policies are, despite our belief that over time it's going to be more and more digital, is still mostly sold by agents. And what we experience is that people buy those policies from agents, and the agency business is rough. There is a lot of turnover. The agent checks out at one point. And the consumer ends up owning a complex financial product that they don't understand, a carrier that don't necessarily know how to provide a service, and the agent that has checked out. And I think there is a gap there in providing more and more engagement and more services against that premium to generate this retention, upsell, cross-sell, and more products that are being sold over time. What we see is that consumers end up having 9 life insurance policies, but only like 1.1 with the same carrier. And this gap means that they do want to have more products, but those products are not being presented to them at the right point in time for them to go and buy those products. And by using the data in a better way and contextualizing it in a better way, you understand that this type of customer has this type of needs and would be interested in that type of recommendation, and it makes the decision so much easier. And then with other solutions like Human API, you can also make the underwriting process more frictionless, and then it creates a much better experience for the customer, buying more products and having better experience with the carriers that they have insurance with.
Awesome. And just to pull a few of those threads, because Nick kind of borrowed from question 3, which is a perfect segue. So what I'm hearing is it's all about the customer experience, and customer in our mind is sometimes customer and agent. It's the user experience, and how do you create the best possible user experience without adding too much friction. In the life insurance space in particular, life and annuities, that's tough, to your point. There's all sorts of third-party data checks and processes that you need to interject so you're not jacking up risk, but you still want that customer experience. So, and then moving all the way forward to what Brian was talking about, and what Nick was talking about with, we're collecting all this data. In my mind, that's step 1. Now you've got this mountain of data. Before you go in and add more, how do you start to act on it? And a big theme that we hear from so many carrier customers is exactly that. Don't give us more data. We need to know what to do with it. What's the next best action? And how do we create the most personalized experience tailored to that individual? So I'm kind of liking the order we're going in here now. Brian, do you think you could just talk a little bit more about what you guys are doing from that perspective, acting on the data?
Yeah, so there's a few things, right? We've got the operational piece, which is super interesting, and trying to figure out how do you condense that customer experience. I mean, if there's anything you'll take away from the conference over the next few days, is it's going to be that the customer experience is king, and instant is much better than anything else that we've put in front of customers forever. I like to say that insurance companies used to hold maybe the process on their own, right? Like customers need life insurance, so who cares what process they have to go through in order to get life insurance? It's our process. You conform to us, and customers have, I think at the moment, have most of that power now, saying, well, I mean, Amazon can do it. I can get instant almost everything except for insurance. I'm going to put a bunch of pressure on you as a carrier to deliver me an instant experience. So we are certainly interested in trying to figure out how do we modernize that, with underwriting being a main bottleneck, with the customer engagement or lapse being another one of the challenges, right? Of like, how do I keep those folks, once they've bought a policy, how do I keep them engaged? And so we're certainly interested in doing that. On the action side, right, it is, how do I take that information, figure out can I automate the existing processes that use it, whether it's underwriting, whether it is the engagement from an agent or what have you that typically you would do, and make that customer's experience better. One of the other things we're working on in the data org, we're an enablement team. We're not a dashboard building team. So we are trying to give data to others so that they can get that insight faster. I mean, if it was up to me to try and decide all of the things that need to be analyzed and decided, that is not going to work out well for everybody. Like, I'm a bottleneck at that point, and I don't want to be a bottleneck. I'm trying to make other people smarter and be able to action it in the way that they need to, right? So in my data org, we've been working on how do we get that data to the hands of the folks who can take actions faster, whether that is on the operational side, per the discussion that we talked about, or whether that's on the analytical side of I need to evaluate this block or this region because they either seem to be doing great or they seem to be doing terribly, and we need to make some changes so that they can operate as effectively as they need to.
Yeah, so again, I have the luxury of not have to worry about underwriting anymore. So our data focus is really around serving up content and serving up opportunities to our agents. So we're on one side of the house, we have an IMO distribution, so it's a B2B to B2C. So we're 3 layers removed from the actual policyholder. And on the other side of the house, we have a third-party distribution, more typical wholesaler to agent, so we're two steps away from the client. What we're trying to figure out is what types of activities are promoting the sale, what types of activities with our wholesalers, what types of online activities that the agents are conducting, what types of move our clients are making, and also trying to serve up data within their products that they own. So within the annuity, they have investments underneath, starting to serve up articles that are pertinent to their investments within the annuity. So it's much more on the sales side and pushing the right information to the right folks at the right moment in time to incur that sales moment versus looking at the claims because it's a much simpler process, or underwriting. Suitability is pretty easy in the annuity space. It's 15 questions and you're done. So we're looking at the pre-sale movement of data and using it that way in my current spot.
Nick, I'm nervous for your actuaries because they've got some assumptions about the types of things that the customers are going to be doing with the annuities, and you're saying, well, we're going to start changing those. How does that feedback loop happen? Sorry, Woody, I'm taking your job here.
Not my first rodeo with you.
Yeah, this is a common theme.
Yeah, so I mean, like anything we do, we have everyone present in the room to see what the actions are. So the data will tell us something, but then you go back to your actuaries and your pricing and your product people and say, hey, can we tell the client to do that? Is that what we price for? So it's a combined effort, whether we actually serve up the content we want to serve up and the action we want to serve up. We find the data, we make the decision based on the data, and we bring it to the product and the actuaries to make sure that it's not going to be something that's not priced for or cause a less than profitable product.
If I can jump in as well, I think part of the magic is by combining the data science with the actuarial team, because the actuaries have a certain view.
Whoa. I'm an actuary here, and data science. I'm just kidding. That's the combination, right? That we're really after.
Yeah.
And in my experience, both sides are a little nervous of each other, whether it's data scientists or actuaries.
I agree. There is a lot of tension, but the value is there because if the data shows you that here is something that is happening, like real people, the way they interact with the product, it happens this way. Now, either in the pricing model or not in the pricing model, it may need to be in the pricing model or may not need to be in the pricing model, but that's the discussion to have rather than everybody sitting in their silos and just hoping it works.
I'm just going to go off script here because this is actually, I like where this is going. And we talk a lot about departments within these companies being at odds. And one that comes up a lot is marketing and risk, and product teams and risk and underwriting, actuary, et cetera. Again, how do you remove friction without increasing risk? And I'm curious, maybe for you, Nick, with Human API, I feel like this is a big focus for you guys. How are you enabling, and I was going to turn this into a part 2 question anyway, but how are you guys enabling carriers to make decisions like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, listening to these guys, it just kind of reinforces a thought and I guess an observation in my mind is we're starting to see carriers say, okay, with data, the power of data, at first we were seeing, can we do things the same way, only faster? Now it's, can we do things differently, right? So we're starting to see carriers say, hey, instead of asking 45 questions or whatever it is in a part 2 application, is there a way to tap a data source, learn about a consumer, and then personalize it, make it better for the consumer so that we don't have to ask them these 45 questions? Or maybe it's just, hey, confirm if these are true, right? The process can be much, much better for the consumer than it is today. We're also starting to see, instead of health data being put in front of a person to evaluate, right, an underwriter to look at, We're starting to see carriers build out rules engines and logic that says we now have access to this information in a structured format. We kind of joke and say that this industry is one of the industries keeping alive the fax machine. It's crazy, right? Medical records, APSs are still being delivered in image format. But we're starting to see carriers say, hey, now we have access to this data, structured data, health information, ICD-9, ICD-10 codes. We can start to build out rules and models that can actually start to automate this process where we're relying on a human to once do it, right? And what does that do for the industry? All of a sudden now it's, hey, let's devote our underwriters to the high-value, complex cases where they want to work, and we can start to, as we look at term business, where we need to create efficiencies to profitably grow that business, it's a perfect slot for us to start helping the carriers.
Brian, I know you're going to probably want to respond to some of that. We just quickly, we sort of a red light, green light with who do we accelerate, who do we not accelerate, and how do we understand that earlier in the process so data checks are more accurate. We're not wasting money on bad people, not bad people, that's a poor way of saying that, but people that aren't ultimately going to purchase a policy or might end up being declined. How do we get smarter about those decisions? And I've been on panels, or at least in the audience with Brian in the past, where we've talked about, or at least he was talking about, insurtechs and the way that they do business and how it's just speed over everything. And obviously, I'm sure people have many different viewpoints on how that is playing out. But anything that you want to comment about, what Nick and his team are doing?
Yeah, there's a long tail to life insurance policies, right? So you get it wrong up front, and they get very expensive in a hurry. Like the premium as compared to the payouts in those early years is not something you want to be upside down on. So there is something to making sure that you're making smart financial decisions, because that'll catch up with you. And so that's really the magic of either express underwriting or trying to simplify fully underwritten policies to be able to take just medical records. So it does require that coordination with the underwriters and the pricing teams to make sure that you are you're opening up that aperture in lockstep with the pricing assumptions that you've made. So your underwriters are pretty smart folks about knowing the types of things that they look for. They're not super great about turning those into hard and fast rules, to your point. So if you can kind of show them, hey, here's the rule you've effectively been following for the last 5 years, 10 years, or whatever. We're going to turn that into an actual rule. That's going to get you much better credibility than we think it works this way, because they're going to get very nervous. Your pricing folks are going to get very nervous. And you may find yourself on the wrong side of that premium claims side. So there is some steps that you've got to take to ultimately get there. One of the benefits, I suppose, of being an insurtech, many of them are not trying to be full carriers, so they're offloading some of that risk to the full stack carriers like Mutual of Omaha and others. And that's one of the reasons why we're cautious, and probably one of the reasons why the insurtechs think we're all difficult to work with, is because of that risk management piece that's so ingrained in insurance companies. I'm not saying that we won't change. It's just it takes some convincing, and underwriters are probably notoriously the most skeptical group in the entire insurance industry to be able to say, yeah, that feels like a good idea. Let's start accepting more risk without figuring out a way to price it appropriately.
I think a piece of that discussion is that insurance is a long play, and you're playing the lifetime value play, not necessarily the product play. So in a certain product, things might not be all T's across as a way to get a door opener. And many carriers have accelerated products as a direct-to-consumer play that get you some in with the consumer, and then try and cross-sell them into other products that are fully underwritten and more properly underwritten than a quick accelerated product. And part of it is identifying which kind of customers are the type of customers that you want to put through that kind of journey that is more complex, more data intensive, more complex journeys. And but that creates a lot of value because you benefit from both sides. You get an in with a customer on something that is very easy, very smooth, and cross-sell them later to a product that is much more profitable, much more valuable to the consumer as well, but it's fully underwritten.
Yeah, I like that as an approach. And honestly, I've tried to spin it to the underwriters of we want to take the easy ones, right? The definite no's, the definite yeses. Let's take those, let's automate those, set that aside, and then give them the fun, messy ones, which generally they enjoy, of how do we figure out what risk class this person falls in? They've got diabetes, but they run marathons, and they've got a heart condition, but they can do a triathlon. I don't know. They like those types of complex cases.
And expanding beyond, because usually when you talk about underwriting, people go to the fully underwritten business where it is time intensive and complex. But then you talk about the simplified issue type business, you're also seeing carriers think about, hey, I love the speed, I want to be able to offer this type of product to a consumer, but I also need to think about mortality. And how do I continue to improve mortality on that type of business? We're also seeing interest on that side as well.
So you asked how you stop friction amongst the parts of the company. We actually had a discussion last week about questions on the application and complexity. And to Dror's earlier point, using data to understand how people are using your stuff, your products, your applications, we're able to convince the compliance department, like, hey, listen, this is where 90% of the NIGOs are happening on the application. We need to reword this, right? So the product guys said, pull it out, remove the question. We kind of knew that wasn't going to be the right answer, but we presented them with the facts of the case, and this question is causing a significant amount of our NIGOs. Can we reword it? So it was a collective effort amongst distribution, product, and compliance to recreate the question so it's actually more simple language, and then NIGOs are going down. So much simpler scenario than underwriting and straight through processing. That's much more complex, but that's what data tells you. Data can tell you how you need to change, how you need to approach your clients differently, how they're using your products, how they're not using your products, what's causing them to fall out, right? That's really what we're looking from a data perspective is how do you approach your agents and your clients in the most effective, frictionless way. And having those three parties at the table is usually, and then showing data as the proof, usually quiets the friction down. Right? We're not saying, rip out these 4 pages because they're compliance mumbo jumbo. We're saying data's showing us it's causing a problem. We need to think about reworking this part of the application, right? And it seems to go much more smoothly at that point.
Which gets into sort of a behavioral economics. How are people filling out answers and how are they engaging with forms? How can we make that frictionless, seamless, better, for lack of a better term? Which is interesting. We hear that come up quite a bit, because it's so regulated. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I like if we combine both of these kind of concepts, right? It's like, well, I might be able to take that question out. Originally, we had asked the question because we didn't have a better way of ascertaining that answer from the customer. What if I could, instead of ask the question, I could pull it from their medical record? Like now I've got a differentiator that I don't have to ask the complex question, and I get a true answer. I don't know if you all know this, but sometimes customers lie on applications. No. You get a true answer because you can actually verify it with another third party or something.
Yeah, and one thing we're doing is we call that cognitive load, where it's how long is it taking me to understand the question? Is it a confusion thing or a manipulation, right? The same hesitation or behavior could have 2 very different outcomes, but how do you understand that and how do you do it real time?
So what I'm hearing is fill out applications as fast as possible.
No, see, that's where you're wrong. You'd be surprised. That's not how people fill them out, but we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about you guys. So one other thing that I wanted to discuss, because now we've sort of gone pretty deep down the underwriting portion of this. Let's bring it back up to the surface. Marketing, product, we've started getting back into frictionless experience. How are you guys seeing data being used from a marketing perspective, a personalization perspective? I know you and I had a conversation about this. I'm curious, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. So when you think about your digital assets and how you're presenting in the digital space, you have to understand your client's actions and what they're looking for and serve up the right information. So we're really starting to try and use data to create a customized experience, almost amongst people like you also use, right? Serve them up information. But even more so, looking at marketing journeys. So as we're sending things out, whether it be illustrations or marketing pieces, following up with a phone call, doing a face-to-face meeting with an agent, we're trying to figure out what are the 4 or 5 punch combination that is resulting in the most closed business, and then train to that. So we're actually changing the way we're training wholesalers based on the data that's telling us, if you do this, this, and this, and finish with a face-to-face meeting, that seems to be our most successful combination. And now we have those 2 wholesalers that are doing that, training to that methodology. So going directly to the client, trying to digitize and customize their experiences when they're working with us, but also training our people differently on how to go to market with the most successful pieces that we've been seeing.
We've been experiencing a lot of momentum in areas where you talk to the issue that a consumer actually has. So you can use the data to surface certain cohorts that have certain issues with their policy. I'll give a very kind of niche and tactical example. Interest rate has gone up. Markets, went the other way. It's going to continue to go up tomorrow. If your policy have 3% guarantee, might have been very lucrative 2 years ago, not that interesting coming Thursday. some people may be very interested in having that meeting. And if you can put something like this out there to those people, and you know who those people are, and you know how to write it properly, you put it in front of them and ask them, do you want to meet an agent and talk about that? They'll click on the button. And what we see is when they click on the button, you put them in front of an agent. So there is a lot of automation and streamlining, and a bunch of projects Nick and I have done in Nick's previous lives on streamlining all of that all the way down to a meeting at a producer's calendar. Then that meeting is 3-5 times more effective because the agent doesn't need to do anything but show up. The consumer already know what they're going to come to talk about, and if you already have the next best action, you already have the recommendation baked into that, it's a much easier conversation to have.
For both the customers and the agents. Goes back to the
and the carrier.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot too. Like if you could tell an agent, this user is 3 times more likely to buy than this one, and this one's 5 times less likely to buy, who are they going to call first? Making their lives easier too. We like to say agents are customers too. But Brian, how about you? Anything that you guys are doing from a marketing perspective?
Yeah, we market through all 3 of the major channels, whether it's DTC or through our own advisors or through the independent distributors. We use data in all 3 of those categories, right? We do a little bit with the advisors of, hey, trying to nudge them towards folks who are maybe more likely to buy than others. I don't know that we've got quite the metric of like 3x and 5x less, but we're certainly doing that. On the DTC side, right, we acquire a lot of third-party information to help us figure out how to target. We personalize if they hit our website based on what they have seen before or how they arrived at our website. Those are very effective ways. And if you look at e-commerce companies, they are very good at personalizing or tailoring things to you as a customer. And they do that for a very good reason, right? They've got a lot of data that shows if I do that, those customers are more likely to convert and maybe turn into long-term customers because they know me and they know what I'm going to want next and so on. So we do that certainly on that side. And then on the independent side, we try and make our independent agents look brilliant, right? We try and give them as much information as they can or as they need in order to direct their clients as necessary, whether that is information about our products or information about the customer that we may know. We try and make them smart. But certainly we're feeding data to those marketing channels to try and figure out how do we get the right customers from each of Omaha. And we know we don't serve everybody, but here's the niche of folks that we serve, and here's the things that we know about them. That's something we're definitely trying to do.
We should talk. I know a company that specializes in intent data. We could probably help with that whole 3 times thing.
Yeah, cool.
So we've now come back up to the surface. We've talked marketing. I want to go 1 layer higher and just get into the clouds 5-10 years out. We talk a lot about the future in insurance, long tail risks, so on and so forth. I want to know what everybody's excited about. What are you excited about that data will enable over the next, let's call it 5 to 10 years? Why don't we start with you, Dror?
So I'm going to try and go very high level.
Go for it.
I think what consumers really want is self-driving financials. What they want is to keep the same lifestyle when they retire. They want the family to keep the same lifestyle if something happens to them. They want not to know what is a whole life, universal life, guarantees, interest rate, et cetera, et cetera. They don't care. Most of them just want to give their money to somebody to make sure that they have this, lifestyle regardless of whatever happens to them. And I think our mission collectively is to figure out a way to be in front of them at the right intersections to make sure that we maintain that. If we're able to put in front of them the right offers at the right points in time, we can give them a product that is very easy to buy, therefore there is so much less friction in buying that. The agent is so knowledgeable that they can guide them through the process. Essentially, with not a lot of touch points, they can get to the point where they have the right amount of insurance if something happens, they have the right amount of savings for retirement, and so on. And we see all of those startups and carriers trending that way, trying to think about the long-term relationship, trying to think about the consumer perspective and not just as a manufacturer perspective. And I think most of the value would come from figuring out additional ways to provide that level of experience to the consumer, where the consumer can actually be hands-off and say, I'm trusting you as my partner, therefore I'm giving you my money, and in return, what I'm expecting is to not care about this when I retire because I'm going to have, the same amount, I'm going to be able to maintain that that lifestyle that I have, and my family would continue having that if something happens to me, and so on.
I think we're really excited. So we've seen amazing, value and growth out of using the data at the individual level to automate processes that are already in place. We've talked about this, right? Underwriting is one of those. I think there's great potential in using the data at the aggregate level to create better consumer experiences, but also to help the carrier better understand their business. I mean, as it relates to us, not just pulling the data one time on a consumer to make underwriting faster, but how do I ongoing have access to this health data that I can create better products for the consumer that maybe offer them better services as they continue to be one of our policyholders? At the aggregate level as a carrier, how do I understand the data coming in from my distribution? How do I segment that and be able to understand where is quality business coming from? What distribution should I double down on? Where is that quality coming from? We see great opportunity in that, using the health data in an aggregate level instead of looking at the individual.
Yeah, I think 5-10 years out, what excites me is data-driven decisioning. So we always think about data for frictionless experiences, but I'd love to get to a place where you start to use data for generational relationships with our clients, right? Our long-tail products, stats that always bother me is 83% of surviving children or beneficiaries will change advisors and carriers, and 73% of surviving spouses will change carriers and change advisors. And that's all because we're not using the data that we have to be generational, right? We know a ton about our customers, and to your point, Nick, continue to pull health data so you can offer them things besides the product. From an annuity perspective, understand what they're trying to do in retirement, what their goals are, what their hopes are, and you have all this information doing a fiduciary responsibility and all the right. You understand your customers at a depth that most other companies don't understand the customers. We should use that data. I'm excited about using that data to take that one product policy relationship with one individual in their network to generational network capabilities. That's data-driven decisioning across the board. I think that's really where we want to get to, right? You can use the data to create less friction. You can use the data to simplify underwriting. That's all more tactical. It's creating that universe around your customers and getting into their network and getting into the generational capability, and using the data to do that more effectively, I think, is exciting.
So I guess I think second, Nick alluded to this earlier. The thing that I suppose I'm most excited about 5 to 10 years from now in using data would be if you can improve the lives of your customers, because in most cases, maybe annuities aside, the customer and the insurance company are in alignment for nudging them to make better risk type decisions. If it's we want you to live a healthier lifestyle, that's certainly beneficial to insurance companies. We want you to drive safer, beneficial to insurance companies as well as customers in both of those situations, right? In the life insurance one, customer is still alive, and generally people are happy about that. In the car accident or in the auto accident one, right? Customers are less likely to have auto accidents, which generally makes them happier. That is where I think the 5 to 10 years from now, if we can do that as an industry, we'll have succeeded wildly. If we can show improvements in mortality and reduction of losses, that's a win for us and a win for society. Dror, on the other hand, I want that, I think, but I am extremely skeptical that type of hands-off financial awareness is going to work, because if there's anything I've learned from watching scandals in financial services is that people will take advantage of that in the way that you do not want them to. And I don't know how to monitor it, and maybe it's it's going to happen anyway, and we got to find a way to figure out where the advantage, people take advantage of it. But I want that as a customer, right? I don't want to have to worry about it a ton. If I could put my finances on autopilot, I just don't know how to trust somebody enough to put my finances on autopilot. There's plenty of cautionary tales. Again, whether it's big financial markets or celebrities, I suppose, are typically the ones that you hear about.
I accept that. I think the fact that a vision is hard to execute on doesn't make it a bad vision. I think the goal here is basically to shoot for the stars to reach to the moon. I think if that is the target, it trickles down to having better consumer experience, having more touch points, having product or a journey that is much more simple and clear to the consumer, because the other end is also very confusing to the consumer. I don't know that everybody here on the stage understands how a whole life policy works or how a universal life policy works. But the consumers don't understand that either. So you're right that they probably trust, mutual fund more than they trust Madoff, but that's a low bar to go, to go over.
Yeah, there's somewhere in between, right? Because the industry itself has been product heavy, where it's like, look at my whole life product, and here's these fancy features, and if everything works out great, you get a return that you would not be able to get anywhere else, and it's tax free, right? Like, so there's some real product heavy specific things that probably don't necessarily serve the industry well, to your point of like for customer understanding. But on the flip side is like completely hands off. So I think to your point, maybe it is meeting in the middle of like, well, we would love to get hands off. We're going to get pretty close, and what that results in is better, clear language. You mentioned this, Nick. Better, clear understanding from the customer of what it is that they're buying and how it's actually going to help protect them. I mean, that's a big win. I feel like if we could do that as well as an industry.
I agree.
All right, we've only got a couple more minutes, so I think moving from one super exciting topic to the other, which is compliance. I know we've talked about this before. You can't talk about data without talking about compliance, especially if you're getting into accelerated underwriting. That comes up for us a ton, is how are we staying GDPR compliant, CCPA, every other week there's a new regulation. Maybe you guys can just quickly, and we don't, I think, have time to go down the list, so if anybody wants to just jump up, but maybe with the context of accelerated underwriting, how are you ensuring that carriers stay compliant with the way that you're making decisions currently?
I like that everybody's pointing at me for this one. So
you're nominated for
GDPR is real easy for Mutual of Omaha. We are US only, so like that one, we'll take that one off the table. But CCPA is effectively the same thing, so I can try to answer it that way. It's trying to make transparent to the customer what it is you're collecting, how you're using it, and then give them the option to manage that data. Like that is effectively the core of most of the privacy laws that are coming up, and trying to find a way to make that as easy as possible for the customer to understand and flip on or off, right? So we've got a preferences center that we had to build because we didn't have one before, that makes it transparent to the customer of what it is we're collecting and how they've opted in or opted out, either way, of the types of things that we're doing. And we do that both for new customers, which is much easier to do in the onboarding process, but also for the existing ones, you've got to find a way to help manage that. So in the accelerated underwriting piece, you have to make a company decision of whether or not you're going to keep and use that data for however long, or if you want to shed it and get rid of it, right? Like say, oh, we collected it, but we destruct it after some period of time. Whether or not they buy the policy is probably another question that you've got to answer as a company. So thankfully, we've got a few attorneys who are very interested in this and have helped guide us to those decision points, and then they nudge you in the right direction. I mean, it's only getting more. You're only getting more privacy, data governance type laws from here. The other thing that we've tried to do with the analytical data that we collect, in addition to operational stuff that I just described, is find a way to automate those rules so you make the easy way of accessing that data the compliant way. Sure, if somebody is hell-bent on finding a way to get access to that information, they may be able to do it, but you've at least taken most of that work off the table, and then you do the monitoring and training on the back end of that to make sure that your employees are using the data correctly.
Awesome. That pretty much brings us to time. We've got less than 60 seconds left, so unless anybody has any closing remarks, just big thank you to Sureify for inviting us up here. Hope everybody enjoys the rest of the event.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.